have really been, or the stance of the candidate, and now President-elect Trump, has been opaque and sometimes inconsistent. And so we'll have to wait and see. It's really difficult to try to predict how that'll unfold at this point.
What responsibility do you believe Russia has to respond to these claims? How do you envision them responding, if at all?
It seems that Russia has a well-developed machine for responding to these sorts of efforts on the part of the West to uncover the truth, to try to find out what has really happened. So I wouldn't expect any kind of cooperation from Russia, certainly not an admission of any kind of involvement. In terms of the responsibility of the rest of the West, my view, as I mentioned in the article that came out not long ago, is that indeed this does violate Article 5 of the NATO treaty. And that treaty basically says, that article in the treaty basically says that an attack on one is an attack on all, and the alliance is dedicated to maintaining not simply the territorial integrity, but also the political independence of its member states. And so if we see a foreign government attempting to influence elections in the West, specifically in the U.S., but possibly in other countries as well, part of the NATO alliance, then that to me amounts to a violation of political independence, or at least an attack upon it and our homeland security. And so it would seem to me that NATO probably has a role to play here.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know there's other Western countries that have presidential elections coming up. You know, you have France, Germany, and you talked about the fact that they might face similar threats as well.
That's right. I think one of the clear international implications, one of the things we can clearly expect to see over the next few months, are ongoing, continued Russian efforts to influence general elections in a host of Western countries. The most prominent of them are the Netherlands in March, France in April and May, and then Germany in September. And I know that the German government is already preparing for this.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Denny.
My pleasure. Thanks for calling.
Dr. Denny is a research professor of joint, interagency, intergovernmental, and multinational security studies at the U.S. Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute. For the first time in 35 years, the Big Apple Circus will not be performing at Lincoln Center for the holidays. The circus canceled its upcoming season in July and filed for bankruptcy 3 weeks ago. Since then, the circus has said it wants to keep its clown care program going. The outreach program has clowns dress up as doctors to do rounds in pediatric wards of hospitals. Now, the clown doctor community is trying to figure out what's next. Tom Piccolo reports.
Liz Bolick has been performing as a hospital clown for 28 years. When she is on duty, she is better known by her medical name.
My name in the hospital is Dr. Sneakers.
Bolick says that some of her career's best moments have come while performing for sick kids.
We would get those kids to laugh and do tricks and do running gags and juggle and do circus stuff.
Parents would get to see their kids laughing for the first time in weeks, sometimes months. But this type of work can be draining on the clowns.
I think it was after 2 years, like 30 of our kids died within 2 months. It's almost like being in a war zone. It's very hard work emotionally, but it's also like this mix with this extraordinary joy. It was the most meaningful time of my life.
Earlier this year, Bolick says the members of Clown Care saw Big Apple's financial struggles and decided to take action.
The clown doctors from the Big Apple Circus broke away, and we started our own organization. So you need to speak with Karen McCarty.
Karen McCarty had been with the Big Apple Circus for more than 27 years. There's a reason McCarty has such a special place in her heart for clown doctoring. She was once a sick kid herself.
It is an extreme passion of mine, the work of medical clowning, as I'm a cancer survivor myself. I'm a childhood cancer survivor.
She says clown care was so important to her that she had to leave the organization to save the practice.
It was a difficult choice for me to leave the Big Apple Circus, but I felt that they were going through, unfortunately, such financial fragility, and we had a 30-year legacy of work that I wanted to have continued.
So, in July, McCarty and 2 of her colleagues left Clown Care to form their own organization. They named it Healthy Humor. Now there are 2 clown doctor programs in the New York area, the Old Guard and the Startup. Will Maitland-Weiss is the executive director of Big Apple Circus. He says Clown Care has a future.
I think that some combination of other nonprofit organizations are going to pick up on the programming that we do in pediatric hospitals.
McCarty has a suggestion where clown care should land.
And we hope that's us. We certainly have the most experience. There is actually a conversation going on as we speak in terms of potential transitioning of these programs.
But some clowns are juggling a job with each. Take Joel Jeske. He works as a clown doctor for both clown care and healthy humor. At least for now.
With healthy humor, as that program grows and as Big Apple works out what it's going to do, eventually I'm sure there's going to be a line drawn in the sand and people are going to have to, decide one way or another. Right now it's kind of up for grabs. So it's like you're continuing with the programs that are surviving.
Jeske says he has seen the impact of clown doctors firsthand. He has also seen the science to back it up.
We literally had a research scientist walking behind us, checking off people who had been affected in some way by either a greeting, a presence, or something we did. And it was amazing that at the end of the day, he was like, well, gentlemen, you basically affected over 4,000 people.
Jeske says he doesn't care what organization he works for, as long as clown doctoring stays healthy. Tom Piccolo, Columbia Radio News. President-elect Donald Trump pledged to repeal the Affordable Care Act throughout his campaign. That would particularly affect women who rely on Obamacare for access to affordable birth control. Since the election, doctors have reported a significant increase in the number of women seeking long-term forms of contraception, particularly the intrauterine device, or IUD. Rebecca Scott reports.
Laura Benson is an actor from California who gets her insurance through the Affordable Care Act. The day after the election, Benson says she scheduled an appointment for an IUD as a precaution.
So, if I weren't sitting in the space of reflection of, actually being quite afraid that my reproductive rights will be taken away in the next few years, I wouldn't get it inserted, and I would continue to use condoms.
This won't be the first time Benson will get an IUD. She had her first one taken out after experiencing mood swings and hair thinning. But, she says, the health risks of hormonal contraception don't worry her as much as the thought of having to carry an accidental pregnancy to term. Benson says she's always taken access to emergency contraception like Plan B for granted, until now.
This is definitely the first time that it's actually landed for me that, people don't want me to be in control of my body.
Benson is one of many women who have made a reproductive plan of action in the wake of Trump's win. Julia Huff, a gynecologist at NYU Langone, says the trend is unmistakable.
Pretty much every new group of women that I've found myself in the last month, as soon as someone finds out what I do for a living, the entire conversation goes to IUDs, without fail.
Huff says that within 2 days of the election, there was a noticeable increase in the number of IUDs she was ordering each day. And that's not all.
I'm noticing that women who are asking about IUDs and for more information on them are the ones who are on the plans that are at risk. And women who are on private insurance who maybe it's not as on their radar that they might fully lose their insurance, don't seem as concerned at this particular moment.
Rhonda Kalarick is a medical student who's also reliant on Obamacare for her birth control. She had a Paragard IUD inserted 3.5 years ago. The Paragard is supposed to last up to 10 years, but she made an appointment to get hers replaced next month. I met her at a bar near her apartment in Williamsburg to discuss her decision.
I wouldn't have gotten the IUD replaced if Hillary had won, because I don't think that women's reproductive rights would have gone under fire in this way. And I'm particularly concerned about Pence's way of thinking and the general Republican way of thinking, where they're not really considering science ever. They don't really know how anything works.
Kalarick is getting a new Paragard 7 years sooner than necessary because she's afraid of what the next 4 to 8 years will mean for her reproductive rights. She's not sure the Paragard will still be free by the time the current one expires.
Without insurance, it's $600 or $700 just for the insertion.
Some Republicans, like Mike Pence, believe this type of IUD causes spontaneous abortion. Julia Huff says that isn't how it works, but misconceptions such as those may put women's access to birth control at risk.
One of my biggest concerns watching the election results come in was actually what's going to happen to reproductive care and women's access to medical care in general. I think everyone's very on edge and waiting to see what happens because we just don't know.
Until then, Huff says she'll continue to recommend long-term contraception to any sexually active woman who doesn't want to get pregnant within the next year. This is Rebecca Scott, Columbia Radio News.
Researchers are lining up behind an experimental drug treatment that reduces symptoms of depression within hours. Ketamine, an anesthetic also used as a party drug, has led to many new depression treatment clinics across the U.S. Researchers and doctors are calling it the biggest breakthrough in depression research in 30 years. Taylor Wisner reports.
Catherine Way is a comedian living in Houston. She struggled with depression her entire life. Then, in her early 20s, she was sexually assaulted twice. Her depression got so bad that she couldn't leave her home, and she developed obsessive suicidal thoughts. As a last resort, she checked out ketamine, which she had heard about from a friend.
The treatment starts, it's very, very intense. You kind of go back and revisit traumatic events, but you comfort yourself during them.
In the days after her first 2 treatments, she says she felt a dopamine rush, kind of like first date jitters. After her first treatment, Way says only once has a suicidal thought crossed her mind.
But other than that, I have had absolutely zero urges, anything about self-harm, not even really depressive thoughts.
She's had 6 treatments during November this year, and now she'll have 1 treatment a month over the next 4 years. Each session costs more than $500, and she's paying for it with donations from friends and family. They chipped in a GoFundMe page that she set up to cover her treatment.
I just am like, wow, who is this person who's like laughing and happy and, who can get out of bed and function and go to work and be productive. And I'm just kind of floored and really excited to get to know this new version of me.
Dr. Kyle Lapidus, a psychiatrist, runs a Manhattan clinic called U.S. Ketamine. Since he opened over 2 years ago, he has given a few hundred patients intranasal ketamine treatments in his office on the Upper West Side. He picks patients similar to Way who have tried a number of drug combinations before.
I think people are warranted in having some skepticism. I've also been very impressed by what I've seen.
He said the majority of his patients who have the ketamine treatment say they no longer have their regular symptoms of depression.
But a lot of people report drastic, especially after their first treatment, a drastic change that they've not before experienced that.
While success stories like these may seem unbelievable, they are the norm for Rebecca Brockman. She's a research scientist at Columbia's Psychiatry Department. A 2014 Oxford University study showed that out of 28 patients with treatment-resistant depression, a third improved within a few days of the last ketamine injection. And the effects lasted anywhere from 25 days to 8 months. Brockman said the studies and the doctor's findings concur.
Doctors are very conservative, so you can be somewhat confident that they are very confident if they're using it off-label, especially considering its illicit history.
But there are still skeptics like Dominic Sisti, an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He was concerned about the rising number of suspicious-seeming ketamine clinics that were opening in 2013. The following year, he penned an article cautioning against the drug. He wrote that patients might be desperate for the treatment and that it might lead them to miss potential risks.
I'm starting to evolve on the question as more data come in. But at the same time, I really do think that we need like a systematic set of studies that provide clinicians who are getting into this space with clear protocols and best practices.
Sisti says some pharmaceutical companies are experimenting with variations of the drug. But until one is developed, he said people seeking this treatment should do consumer research on the drug and the nearby clinics. Taylor Wisner for Columbia Radio News.
Next month, construction will begin on the Bayview Correctional Facility at the corner of 20th Street and 11th Avenue in Manhattan. The former women's prison will be renovated as a women's center housing nonprofits and other businesses. But many of the people involved in the transition still remember the site as it once was. Meg Dalton reports.
I meet Sharon Richardson on the 3rd floor of what used to be the Bayview Correctional Facility.
Here to meet Sharon?
Oh,
hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
She leads me to one of the old cells. It's empty now, but it used to have.
Bed. Right.
chair, lockbox. That's it.
And a window. It's a pretty bleak room, but Richardson says most women would decorate their walls.
They took pictures that they had from their kids or family members off a visit, and we put toothpaste on the back of those pictures, and that's how they stuck on the wall.
There aren't any traces of toothpaste left on the walls now, and the furniture is long gone, but her memories are as strong as ever. Looking out the window, Richardson is overcome with emotion. She's thinking about the day she was released 6 years ago.
I go down those front stairs. And I sign these papers. And they put the key in the door and open the door, and I walk out. Free.
The Brooklyn native spent 20 years in prison for the role she played in the murder of a man she says abused her and her children. Today, Richardson is part of the team turning this former corrections facility into a feminist center, which is what Pamela Schiffman, executive director of the Novo Foundation, the group behind the renovation, always envisioned.
These are women who have experienced the worst of what society does to marginalized women, and therefore often have the most creative ideas of how this space can be used.
The state of New York closed the prison after it was heavily damaged during Hurricane Sandy.
When it was a prison, it was very dark and forbidding. So all of the women we talked to, especially the women who'd been incarcerated at Bayview, said this women's building needs to be filled with light. You know, it needs to be a place that feels very welcoming and warm.
Schiffman says they've interviewed hundreds of women like Richardson about what the building should look like. Rooms that were once prison cells and a commissary will soon be offices, an art gallery, and daycare center. The walls of the prison gym have already gotten a bit of a makeover. The room is full of portraits celebrating women done by photographer Annie Leibovitz. She opened the exhibit last month with some help from feminist activist Gloria Steinem. At the opening reception, Steinem said she's been pushing for a women's center in the city since the 1970s.
We have spent 40 years in this city trying to have a women's building or a women's center. San Francisco has a big, beautiful building, an old building that they transformed that's been there for 40 years. Other cities do, but the intensity of real estate, pressure on real estate here has kept this from happening for 40 years.
Like the building itself, Sharon Richardson, who was incarcerated at Bayview, is undergoing her own transformation. She now runs a soul food catering company and works as a re-entry specialist, helping women who are just getting out of prison. She looks forward to continuing this work in the new space.
There is a place where you can come and actually trust. Maybe there's no one in your family that you can actually trust, but you can come to the women's building and find women here who will not judge you and will sit with you hands-on for hours at a time and actually talk and get you through whatever it is that you're going through. That's powerful.
The women's building is expected to open in 2020. Meg Dalton, Columbia Radio News.
As the temperature drops, food delivery apps like Grubhub, Seamless, and Yelp Eat 24 make it easy to stay indoors. But data shows New Yorkers are stingier than other Americans. They tip less to the people who go out so you don't have to. Emily Dugdale has the story.
It's a familiar sequence in New York. The buzzer rings, the door opens, up a few flights of stairs where the food is handed over, and your delivery guy leaves with a tip. Angel Cabrera, dressed in a reflective vest and helmet, is picking up orders for a delivery app. Since the entire order is done online, he often doesn't know what tip he'll get.
Depends. $1, $2, $5, or less.
Data from Grubhub shows New Yorkers tipping about 13% of their order. The national average is 14%. 1% point may not seem like a lot, but for Cabrera, a Dominican immigrant making about $20,000 a year, it adds up. And Cabrera doesn't expect much.
Because the restaurant also pays you. It's what the other person is willing to give and not what you believe you should be given, because then they won't order from where you work.
Cabrera spent 16 months delivering 6 days a week or more for restaurants through apps like Grubhub. He says his best tips are in cash. But delivery apps let customers add tip on their card, which they do more often. And they tip less. Adam Alter researches generosity and population density at NYU and says low tips have to do with living in a big city.
So I could imagine that tipping declines because people in New York generally are bombarded by other humans.
He says living among 8 million people makes New Yorkers a lot less generous.
You see them as sort of a crowd rather than as individuals with hopes and dreams and and needs and desires, and that tends to make you less connected as a human being.
So when New Yorkers are hovering over the tip button in their app, they don't think about Angel Cabrera on the other end.
And what that does is it sort of gives you an excuse not to tip as generously, because you don't have to look at the person's face and look into their eyes and feel bad about what you've decided to do.
But Grubhub does automatically calculate tip amounts of 10% to 20% of your order. Alter says that by setting tip default options, delivery apps can change tipping trends.
We pay a lot of attention to defaults, and we tend to stick pretty closely to them a lot of the time. So if a site's presenting you with a default of 20%, you'll see that the tipping hews to that pretty closely.
But if that default is smaller, Angel Cabrera is probably walking away with less tip. Food delivery apps cater to busy young professionals, such as Alex and Roger, two friends in their mid-20s who didn't want their last names used. I caught them as they left Central Park in the East 90s. They're both Grubhub users, so I asked them how much they tip on a standard order.
Probably like $2.
That's Alex. His friend Roger didn't top him by much.
$3. Flat rate. It's like the same thing I tip a taxi driver.
So if you had like a $40 order, you would still tip like
$3. I mean, you still just bring it to me. It doesn't really make a difference.
The problem is, like everything about tipping, the guidelines are fuzzy. And not even the delivery apps are in agreement. Grubhub spokesperson Caitlin Carl says the company encourages customers to tip at least 20%, the same as if you were dining in a restaurant.
You still have a driver that is leaving a restaurant and traveling sometimes up to a few miles.
But Mike Gaffrey, the CEO of Yelp E24, another food delivery app, says he's happy to see their customers averaging 15%. Yet similar to Grubhub, Yelp E24 data shows New Yorkers tipping below the average. He has his own theory.
What I think happens is in New York, there's a lot of people who are, single working professionals. They're ordering for one person. They're ordering for somewhere nearby and just a meal for themselves.
And that small order size usually means tips don't go much above 14%, Gaffrey says.
On a dollar basis, that works out to closer to maybe $3.50 versus $4 to $5 in some of these other markets.
But no matter the size, Angel Cabrera braves weather and walk-ups to bring you your order. And despite fluctuating tips, he's still optimistic.
Mostly, people pay. It just depends on their awareness.
Perhaps something to think about next time you order in. Emily Dugdale, Columbia Radio News.
One family in Broad Channel, Queens, has something special to celebrate this holiday season. After struggling for 4 years to rebuild after Superstorm Sandy, they finally got their home back last month. Sushmita Pathak reports.
Karen Contreras has a beautiful two-story home in Broad Channel, Queens. It has cheerful bright yellow walls and a pretty wooden deck. Looking out of the window, you can see the A train going over the water or hear the gentle lapping of the waves. But 4 years ago, when Superstorm Sandy hit the city, Karen Contreras' house was destroyed.
Coming home, it was like walking into a war zone. There were boats in the street, houses down.
Karen took me around the house to show where the damage had occurred.
So this room is what they did. That corner was where it all was leaking.
Mm-hmm.
Here is where, the deck came into the house, this spot.
After the storm, Karen and her husband applied to build it back, the city's post-Sandy rebuilding program. But like most applicants, they encountered a big bureaucratic maze.
They would lose papers that they have scanned into their computers constantly, the same papers, the same things, over and over.
With Build It Back, they came to an unexpected roadblock. Karen's husband, Sabino Contreras, is from El Salvador. But after marrying Karen 28 years ago, he did not renew his green card. This was a problem.
So they said, okay, once you get the card fixed, we could help you. It would cost us $450. So I was able to borrow the money. We got everything fixed.
But after going through all that trouble and shelling out more money than they could afford for the green card, Build It Back still denied the Contreras application. The reason? A couple of lost receipts.
It takes so much out of you.
After the Build It Back fiasco, Karen sunk into depression.
I wound up having a breakdown and was in the hospital. And I'm like so scared of storms. I used to love the water and listening to it, and now I have bad dreams.
Then last year, someone introduced Karen to Friends of Rockaway, a non-profit organization. Zach Cheney is the volunteer coordinator there. He says many people who couldn't work it out with Build It Back come to them.
We are the only nonprofit rebuild left in Queens, and we're going to be here until nobody needs our help anymore.
I don't know how I could thank them.
Karen Contreras says Friends of Rockaway fought to get her the help she needed.
And, I got my kitchen, and I'm back to a little bit of a normalcy. I feel like they're my family now.
This year alone, Friends of Rockaway rebuilt 65 houses. And just a few weeks before Thanksgiving, the Contreras had their homecoming. Karen baked a big batch of cookies in her new kitchen. Someone got a cake, and for the first time in 4 years, Karen was home. Now, Karen is preparing for Christmas. Her son and his family, including her toddler grandson, are coming to meet them from Florida.
I haven't seen the grandbaby since, I think, July. So they're coming for Christmas. So I'm putting a tree up. I haven't put a tree up in so long.
But not all families are as lucky, says Karen.
I'm blessed because I have my house, but there are people out there who aren't living in their houses. They're paying a mortgage for a house they can't live in, and they're paying rent on an apartment.
In this small neighborhood in Broad Channel alone, there are many families still waiting to get home. Sushmita Pathak, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Courtney Vanopal.
And I'm Tom Piccolo. Up next, you'll hear about a Bronx high school where students are learning to code, how molecules on your cell phone can help catch criminals, and why thousands of clemency petitions are still pending just weeks before President Obama leaves office. But first, the headlines.
In New York, I'm Sushmita Pathak. President-elect Trump's transition team announced this morning that retired General John Kelly would be the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Ex-General Kelly would be the third general to get a top position on Trump's cabinet. 4 senators, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, came together yesterday to condemn Russia's involvement in hacking the U.S. presidential election. Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Democratic Senator Jack Reed joined Senator Charles Schumer in calling for a bipartisan probe.
Recent reports of Russian interference in our election should alarm every American.
Speaking on behalf of the others, Senator Schumer stressed the issue should not become partisan because the stakes were too high, he said. Trump, on the other hand, dismissed the CIA's report. In an interview on Fox News yesterday, he called it, quote, ridiculous. Government forces succeeded in driving out rebels from the Syrian city of Aleppo over the weekend. The Syrian military says it has retaken 98% of the rebel-held city. But with government focus shifting to Aleppo, ISIS fighters have retaken the ancient city of Palmyra. In local news today, the City Council is discussing how it can better manage parking to meet the city's diverse community needs. In recent months, the expansion of City Bike has caused some loss of parking space and created tensions in some communities. Metro North's Harlem and New Haven lines are experiencing delays of up to 25 minutes because of congestion and track issues. A disabled train in the East River Tunnel caused delays on several Long Island Railroad lines this morning, but most trains have been restored now. It's going to be a cold afternoon with highs in the mid-40s and lows in the mid-30s. It's 44 degrees in Central Park. Sushmita Pathak, Columbia Radio News.
Internet security and insecurity was big news in 2016. Think Hillary Clinton's email server, WikiLeaks, and Russian hackers. It's all making some people think more about their own cybersecurity. On a recent Saturday in Brooklyn, people gathered to learn tips to stay safe online. Josie Albertson Grove has the story.
A big conference room at iBeam, a Brooklyn arts and tech nonprofit, became a classroom for 50 people learning about online privacy strategies. I came with my recorder, but organizers were leery about letting me record the group. After all, it was a privacy seminar. For many at the free afternoon class, learning internet security is like learning a new language with new words like threat model, signal, rise up, end-to-end. It was a lot to take in.
I am very new.
That's Eddie. Like a lot of people here, he didn't want to use his last name to protect his privacy. He says the new technologies are a little intimidating, but learning to use them is important.
I think that the election kind of galvanized me, and I realized that there were a lot of things I should have been doing for a while that I hadn't done.
Eddie and the others came to learn about how to stay safer and more private online. This kind of training event is called a crypto party. The crypto partiers, mostly white, mostly in their 30s, weren't really a tech crowd. One man carried a camera, like the kind with film, and a woman in her 60s took notes in cursive on a legal pad. Most people were just casual laptop and smartphone users.
The internet has become less secure rather than more secure, essentially.
David Bohornian works at IBeam. He helped organize the event.
And that's something that people might kind of know instinctively, but has come to seem much more important in the wake of the election.
He says a key part of the crypto party is helping people figure out what level of security is best for them. For example, Bohornian says he doesn't need a lot of security.
I don't use encryption for most of my communications because they tend to be pretty banal.
But he says encryption might provide needed security to people who feel at risk for surveillance.
I think the case of queer or trans or Muslim people in the United States now is a particularly obvious example. Those people may find tools that we're offering here kind of useful.
Lauren Gardner helped organize today's event, and she says it's not just marginalized groups who worry about security. At the beginning of the crypto party, people were asked to raise their hands and show what privacy issues concerned them most.
There were a lot of people, I would say most of the people raised their hand because they were concerned about what would happen to my phone or my devices if I was at a protest. How do I stay safe? How do I keep my information safe?
It's not just about keeping your information from the government or from WikiLeaks. Gardner says your browsing history might tell a private company something about you, something you might want to keep confidential.
So let's say if I read a lot of psychology information, that they might group me into someone who's like a depressed user group. But then what do they do with that information?
Gardner actually used to make ad servers, so she knows how very specific targeting can be.
I used to send targeted messages to my mother through the ad server. I say this I say this because I know what these tools are capable of. It's nothing to necessarily be scary about, but it's something to be aware.
Christine is a cartoonist who came to the crypto party. She wants to see more people learn about internet privacy.
I feel like there's still a general public who's a little too trusting about technology.
She's already using some privacy tools, but she's here to sharpen her skills.
I'm just here to find out if there's anything I missed, anything else I could learn, and I guess meet other people who kind of feel the same way.
Christine was about to start a lesson in the secure messaging app called Signal, led by a trainer named Candace Williams. Williams has worked in tech, and she really knows her way around privacy tools. She says she hopes the crypto party is just the beginning.
And it's baby steps. And we just want people to take one concrete step, because then they're more likely to take more steps in the future.
By the end of the crypto party, several dozen people had taken those first steps toward cybersecurity. Josie Albertson Grove, Columbia Radio News.
Over the past few years, computer science programs across the country have tried to drive home one clear message to young people. Coding is cool. My co-host Courtney Vanopel visited one Bronx high school as it prepared to give a major presentation on coding to the community.
It's a Thursday morning at the Bronx Academy of Software Engineering, or BASE. As the bell sounds, students file into the large brick building right around the corner from Fordham University, their voices echoing throughout the hallways. Inside, computer science teacher John Mannion is impressed by the features of an app his students are designing.
So there's a geolocation part of it. Are you serious? This is like a large, ambitious.
A small database on every health sensor in the Bronx.
Mannion students are preparing for Computer Science Education Week, when they'll present their work to Bronx officials and tech leaders in the community. Daniel Pepin is a senior at BASE. He's part of the first class that will graduate from this computer and technical education school, which opened in 2013. Pepin's app will connect Bronx residents seeking medical treatment with hospitals and health resources.
Basically, our app helps identify certain problems that people are having, health-wise. It allows them to identify where to go and how long it might take in certain emergency rooms.
The Bronx faces significant health challenges, with higher rates of asthma, heart disease, and diabetes than the national average. Pepin and his classmates can develop apps that focus on issues like these because they have spent the past 3 years learning computer languages. Teacher John Mannion explains.
Last year we had a student learn about 5 languages: JavaScript, jQuery, C++, Java, as well as HTML, CSS.
Mannion is the workplace coordinator at BASE. He says many of his students are from low-income or immigrant backgrounds. Knowing how to code puts them ahead of many of their peers and even other adults in the workforce.
With technology, there's a huge market for the jobs.
Mannion can see some of these kids getting a job right out of high school, earning some money, and then going to college.
Some extra years of maturity and perhaps learning, I think, would be a great idea for many of our youngsters.
Coding has the potential to take these students anywhere, but for now, they're focused on their own community. Shadman Chowdhury, a sophomore at BASE, has been working on a fitness tracker since July. His app is called #Not62. That's because the Bronx was named the 62nd least healthy county in New York last year. Chowdhury's app counts Bronx users' total number of steps. The idea is to encourage borough residents to get fit together.
You're going to add up the steps, how many people total goes. We're trying to build an app for the whole Bronx people to make Bronx a healthy place to live.
Chowdhury is from Bangladesh, and he moved to the Bronx less than 2 years ago. Nevertheless, he's invested in the issues that affect his new hometown. Shamar DaCosta grew up in the Bronx. Last January, he and 3 other students developed an app to monitor police brutality. It's called Protect and Swerve. It allows users to record videos of police encounters and upload them directly to the app.
We go through these problems every day, and we go to school that teaches us to build apps to solve the problems, so it feels just great to do that.
BASE students are busy problem-solving in the days leading up to their presentation for Bronx officials. Rodolfo Gonzalez, another BASE senior in Mannion's class, doesn't mind putting in extra time to finish projects. That's what learning is all about.
Learning should be like an experience that you yourself pursue because you want to, Because that's when you learn, when it's something you're passionate about,
He says that's why they're at this school in the first place. Courtney Vanopel, Columbia Radio News.
Teen Vogue has been trending on Twitter lately. The magazine many think to be about fashion and makeup has been taking a more political stance. A big reason for that has been their new editor. In May, Elaine Welteroth became only the second African-American editor-in-chief of a Condé Nast magazine in the company's more than 100-year history. Laura Witt is a freelance journalist who recently wrote an article for Teen Vogue about race and the protesters at Standing Rock. She says Teen Vogue's social awareness is actually nothing new.
I've been reading Teen Vogue since I was a teenager. I'm now 28 years old. To me, it's always had an edge over other teen magazines just because I've always found that the pieces that they had in there were, I guess, more feminist, also a little bit more current and aware that, teen girls are interested in more than just what you think they're interested in. I've noticed with the appointment of Elaine that things have become a lot more diverse. There are more women of color writing for Teen Vogue now than I've noticed in the past. More of their editors are focused in getting, different perspectives of the world, which is really great. And so I'm incredibly happy to be a part of that.
You said that you've been a reader of Teen Vogue for a while. Growing up, did you feel like teen magazines in general were missing this kind of political and social commentary?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really sad because a lot of teen magazines geared towards women and girls, it's difficult to diversify what you have in your magazine if anyone who's in a leadership position isn't willing to see that teen girls are multifaceted and nuanced and engaged politically. Now we have access to more platforms. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, and most of the users happen to be below the age of 25 and happen to be women. If you're looking and you're actually interested in what teen girls have to say, then you do know that they are interested in these things because in the end, we're the ones that are inheriting what the world is going to be like within the next 10, 20 years, and we want it to be shaped differently. We want it to be more inclusive.
Yeah, so going off that, I think it's fair to say that there's been this perception that teen girl magazines are frivolous or shallow, and I'm wondering, there's been some debate on Twitter as to whether this perception is accurate or if we just fail to give credit to the magazines that already do that kind of work.
I think it's a bit of both. We've always cared about these things. We've always cared about politics. We've always cared about how the world is. We've always written. Women are fantastic writers, and that shouldn't even have to be a point that we make. I think if you take a look at how we discuss sports versus how we discuss fashion and makeup, I don't like to say that things like makeup and fashion are frivolous. Like, to me, those are interesting and completely valid parts of our culture and our society. One, it's a form of self-care, at least it has been for me, and fashion is art and movement, so bashing that doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm wondering how you see this trend of socially conscious writing evolving going forward. So, like, what's the next step for teen magazines to take?
I think it would be great to see more magazines actually focus on people who have in the past been told that their perspective holds no value or isn't important. So I'm hoping that teen magazines will keep doing that, because if you invest within, young women of color, then you're only going to benefit society in general. The more empowered we feel, the better society ends up becoming. This is just a natural flow of things.
Laura, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
The game of chess has a long history in New York. People were playing it for hundreds of years before Bobby Fischer came along as a 13-year-old kid in 1956. And it's back, thanks to this year's World Chess Championships, which were held in the U.S. for the first time in 21 years recently. Pia Peterson reports.
This is the sound of two people locked in competition, duking it out on a chessboard. At the World Chess Championships at the Fulton Street Market Building, there is chess everywhere. On shirts, being played on tables, broadcast on screens and on devices. And in a dark room, behind soundproof, bulletproof glass, the two greatest chess players in the world are about to start playing.
Good morning, everybody.
Of the two competitors, the one favored to win is Magnus Carlsen from Norway. Both Carlsen and his opponent were born in 1990 and grew up in the computer age, making them part of the newest generation of chess players. Also included in this generation is Alex Selden, 23. He's from Long Island. He came out today with a friend to watch the match, along with about 300 other spectators.
Almost like a cattle car type environment, a packed, crowded, dark room where I can basically see the hairline of the best chess player in the world. I'm still happy to be here and have the opportunity.
This is one of the problems chess has struggled with as it tries to grow as a sport. How do you make it exciting to follow the moves of two guys, two chairs, 32 pieces, and 64 squares of chessboard? Michael Silver and his kids are standing in line, looking into a mysterious small black box.
This is a black cardboard box that folds around your phone to create a picture. Almost looks like you're holding a pair of binoculars.
The Silvers are a self-described chess family. They're here today to catch a glimpse of the match, but they've been following it online and with this VR headset for over a week now.
And when you look into it, you are looking directly into the room. I'm able to be right next to the board. Magnus is taking a drink of water. Oh, I got a little on my face. It's okay.
The Silver family is able to watch the championship, which lasts for almost a month, from home, and the kids can even watch it at school between classes. They are thrilled about this. And the guy they have to thank? His name is Ilya Marazon.
We changed the way chess is watched all over the world.
Marazon's company is broadcasting the competition in virtual reality for the first time this year in an attempt to make the sport more appealing to today's viewers through tech. For an old game, chess loves tech. Here's Francine Silver, Michael's wife, who is standing in line with Michael and their 10 and 11-year-old sons.
If people were to look at us sitting on the couch at home and all four of us have an iPhone out, sometimes the four of us, my husband included, we are all on chess.com.
The game is having a surge in popularity among younger players. The biggest chess website, chess.com, has grown its traffic 400% in the last 4 years, and even created a spin-off site for players 13 and younger.
Sometimes life is so busy that playing a game on our phones, instead of having to set up the whole chessboard, this 2016 computer age, digital age, it works.
It's not only the internet and apps making the game more accessible. All of this is actually making chess players better at the game. In 1950, the Grandmaster status was introduced. It basically means you can earn your black belt in chess, the highest honor you can reach in the game. Back then, the average age of someone achieving this status was 28. For today's players, it's 18. I checked back in with Alex Selden, the spectator who was watching the game earlier, to see what he thought about the effect technology is having.
technology has gone at such a pace with chess that it's kind of losing the human element in a lot of ways.
He has some misgivings.
But it kind of scares me because this is a game that I first found because my dad showed me it on like a cute little wooden chessboard. And at what point is the experience enough?
Kids can still learn to play on boards at home, in the park, or at school. And while one day they might become champions thanks to the help of computers and algorithms, in the beginning, all it takes is sitting down with someone and making your first move. Pia Peterson, Columbia Radio News. With Inauguration Day 6 weeks away, President Obama has limited time to give out executive clemencies. He's already commuted the sentences of over 1,000 federal prisoners, more than the past 11 presidents combined. But thousands of petitions are still pending, leaving prisoners and their families increasingly anxious. Layla Miller has the story.
In her apartment in Williamsburg, Jerry Vega plunks a large cardboard box onto her dining room table. She sifts through dozens of letters and birthday cards from her father, who has been incarcerated for 28 of her 29 years.
Some of them are 3D, like this one. So, my dad didn't make all these. He would just pay other inmates who were really, really good to make these things, and they would make them.
She picks up a drawing of B2K, a boy band she followed growing up.
I used to love these guys. Had somebody draw them out for my birthday. It's funny. There's a poem that he dedicated to me. Dedicated to the light of my life, my daughter, Jerry Alexandra. The road not taken.
Her father, also named Jerry, was convicted for conspiracy to distribute heroin and cocaine and sentenced to 55 years. Today, he is one of thousands who have applied for clemency from President Obama. Jerry says her father's chance to receive clemency is likely to be much lower under President Trump.
It's worrisome to know that maybe everything's going to kind of be put to a halt. For a lot of us, this means, whether or not our loved one will live to see the day that they are released.
Mark Osler is a former federal prosecutor and one of the leading clemency advocates. He says that the process for reviewing clemency petitions is very slow.
At the pace that the president's been going, there's going to be a lot of worthy people who have petitioned for clemency who probably aren't going to get it and are probably unlikely to get it in the next administration.
In her apartment in Williams.
Yes, we're having some technical difficulties right now. We will get back to the program as soon as possible.
With Inauguration Day 6 weeks away, President Obama has limited time to give out executive clemencies. He's already commuted the sentences of over 1,000 federal prisoners, more than the past 11 presidents combined. But thousands of petitions are still pending, leaving prisoners and their families increasingly anxious. Layla Miller has the story.
In her apartment in Williamsburg, Jerry Vega plunks a large cardboard box onto her dining room table. She sifts through dozens of letters and birthday cards from her father, who has been incarcerated for 28 of her 29 years.
Some of them are 3D, like this one. So, my dad didn't make all these. He would just pay other inmates who were really, really good to make these things, and they would make them.
She picks up a drawing of B2K, a boy band she followed growing up.
I used to love these guys. Had somebody draw them out for my birthday. It's funny. There's a poem that he dedicated to me. Dedicated to the light of my life, my daughter, Jerry Alexandra. The road not taken.
Her father, also named Jerry, was convicted for conspiracy to distribute heroin and cocaine and sentenced to 55 years. Today, he is one of thousands who have applied for clemency from President Obama. Jerry says her father's chance to receive clemency is likely to be much lower under President Trump.
It's worrisome to know that maybe everything's going to kind of be put to a halt. For a lot of us, this means, whether or not our loved one will live to see the day that they are released.
Mark Osler is a former federal prosecutor and one of the leading clemency advocates. He says that the process for reviewing clemency petitions is very slow.
At the pace that the president's been going, there's going to be a lot of worthy people who have petitioned for clemency who probably aren't going to get it and are probably unlikely to get it in the next administration.
In her
So we are continuing to have technical difficulties with that piece. Moving on. Cell phones. They store our bank passwords, photo albums, and private messages. But there's more to a phone than what's on the inside. A new study finds that trace evidence from the surface of cell phones could help create a suspect profile in a criminal investigation. Jill Bosserman reports.
Scientists at the University of California, San Diego took swabs from the surface of 39 people's cell phones. They found molecules drawn from makeup and hygiene products, medications, and food. When they swabbed the same people's hands and faces, the chemical profiles matched. Dr. Peter Dorestein leads the lab that did the study.
We also saw a lot of personal care products. We saw a lot of food. We saw medications that people were taking. And that's when we realized, those molecules must be transferred to objects we frequently touch. And the inside of those molecules could be useful for an investigative team.
Here's how it works. Researchers compare the molecules they find on a phone to a database they're compiling, which has about 18,000 molecules. Once they match the molecules to substances, like cosmetic products or medications, they can create a lifestyle profile for that person. And that could be useful in a criminal investigation.
Learning the certain behavior of a given individual is what helps a crime scene investigator trying to figure out what are the type of people that they should be looking for. And I think this is actually stronger than personality profiling in the fact that we actually have real molecules that give us that insight.
The caveat? The profile can't tell you that a certain person committed a crime, but it can give you a general picture of the kind of person they are. Dorestein says it's a bit like drawing a composite sketch from a bunch of different descriptions.
If you have a lot of witnesses, for example, and let's say it's fairly dark, they can create a sketch of how the person looks like based on all the different descriptions that, let's say, 20 different people provide.
This sketch could narrow the pool of suspects. Gloria Prony teaches chemistry at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She says the technique would need to be tested in a real case. For example, identifying what medication someone takes may be interesting, but it's far from being all you need to convict someone.
You are trying to convict a person just for the fact that you are detecting benzodiazepine, so the person may be depressed. It's not enough for a full conviction.
Normally you'd be looking for fingerprints, you'd be looking for DNA.
Brent Stockwell is a professor of chemistry and biology at Columbia. His research uses small molecules to understand and treat diseases. Stockwell says the new technique is exciting because it uses chemistry to help us understand individuals.
And so now you could be looking for the sort of trace chemical signature of an individual, and it wouldn't by itself be maybe sufficient to identify that person. It wouldn't be like a DNA signature, but it could give the investigators some clues about who they should be looking for.
The project is still going. Labs from 120 countries have collected and sent data to UCSD's crowdsourced database. Right now, 17,000 individual registered accounts have submitted information, and the database is still growing. Jill Bosserman, Columbia Radio News.
It's easy to assume President-elect Donald Trump is a gift for comedians, like a never-ending punchline. But for comics who feel confused, angered, or personally targeted by Trump's win, making light of the next 4 years is no joke. Catherine Sullivan reports.
The night after this past year's election, November 9th, stand-up comedian Phil Stamato tweeted, Performing comedy tonight would feel like showing up at a funeral and only talking about Pokemon with the family of the departed.
The person whose show I was hosting messaged me and she was like, "Hey, you are performing comedy tonight." I was like, "Oh, damn."
So, Phil walked onto the stage of a monthly comedy show in a Chelsea lounge.
Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Phil Stamato.
I went up and said, "How's everybody doing? Feel free to lie."
It seemed this audience of New York liberals was there to escape the events of the past 24 hours.
I was like, cool, do we want to talk about it, or do we want to just pretend that it didn't happen and just try and be as happy as we can? And people went with that second option.
Despite the discomfort, one study suggests this might be the best time to bring up sensitive subjects on stage. A 2012 study from the University of Michigan said viewers of late-night satire are more likely to discuss and debate politics. But how to satirize Trump? May Wilkerson is another New York-based stand-up comedian. She describes herself as a feminist comic who has never shied away from political jokes.
Please let me welcome to the stage the very funny May Wilkerson, everybody.
I would talk about Trump in this very, a dystopian, this is the worst thing that could happen. And if people agreed with me, then they were really on board. And if people didn't, then they would just, shut down and leave me.
Like many comics, May's comedy is deeply personal, but her politics sometimes become a liability. She made jokes about public perceptions of Hillary Clinton.
I just don't like her smile. It's like she's running for president, not your first grade teacher. When I would do jokes about Hillary Clinton, people would boo. If there was Trump supporters in the audience, they would boo. I'll try to power ahead and just be funny, but it's hard when people are just so angry and heated.
Because of these reactions, because you never know who may be in your audience, some comedians just avoid politics altogether. At Wilkerson's first show after the election at New York Comedy Club, not one comic addressed it. One after the other got up without even mentioning the one thing on everyone's mind.
I understand why you need to do this, because it's your livelihood and that's what these people want to laugh at. But I think this part of me just wanted to screaming wake up sheeple, but that's not my comedic voice.
Wilkerson and Stamato agree writing original jokes about Trump is harder than it seems. Comics are trying different ways to satirize a man that seems stranger than fiction.
I'm going through a thing where I compared Donald Trump to the Roman Emperor Caligula and point out the ways that Caligula would have been a better president than Donald Trump so far. And his appointments where he made his horse a senator, and it's a horse wouldn't actually be that bad to have in office compared to neo-Nazis.
He says so far, that joke hasn't gone over so well. Hard as it is to make like-minded audiences laugh, it's even more difficult connecting with people with totally opposite views. Wilkerson says this is something everybody in the industry is struggling with.
I would love to make Trump voters laugh. I wish they would stop yelling out during my sets.
The comedy industry is overwhelmingly left-leaning, so Trump supporters might always feel alienated in comedy clubs. But that's not stopping Wilkerson from questioning her approaches.
I think that one thing liberal comics are going to have to work on, that I personally have to work on, is being less condescending when I talk about people who I disagree with.
It's a tough balance to find when writing jokes.
We have to think about things in a new way now. We have to listen to people. So I think it's going to get interesting. Comedy's going to get interesting.
The question is, will it still be funny? Catherine Sullivan, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that's it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Rebecca Scott was our executive producer. Our senior producer was Taylor Wisner.
Josie Albertson Grove directed the show. Pia Peterson and Catherine Sullivan were our producers.
Sushmita Pathak and Layla Miller were our newscasters. Emily Dugdale was senior editor, and Jill Bosserman was assistant editor. Meg Dalton got this stream live to the web.
Our instructors Carrie Donahue and Ashley Milne-Tite advised our staff. I'm Courtney Vanopel.
And I'm Tom Piccolo. Uptown Radio is live on Mondays at 1 p.m. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.